Hey everybody, welcome to our video on Microsoft Access Split Databases, Part 6. The previous video in this series, which was Part 5, dealt with code that would run at application startup that would automatically figure out if we've lost our links to our backend database, and if so, automatically relink to the backend database. And part of that solution was a text file that held some configuration information. It told us where to look for the backend if we discovered that we had broken links. What I'd like to do in this video is start with the code we had in Part 5 and replace the text configuration file with an XML configuration file. Now Part 5 ran for almost 30 minutes. It was a very lengthy video. I'm sure that part of that fault is mine and the way that I ramble on. Anyway, I don't want to have another 30-minute video on almost the same topic. So my plan for this video is to start with the code from Part 5 and then show you the pieces that I'm replacing. Okay, we're going to comment out all the code that dealt with the text file and then replace it with the code that deals with the XML file, and pretty much not talk about any of the other code. So with that in mind, I would highly recommend that you watch the Part 5 video before watching this video. Because that video ran so long, I don't want to run through all the code in Part 5. Because if you need that, you can watch the Part 5 for that. Well, I only want to cover the pieces of code that I'm going to modify to deal with this XML file. So that is this video here, of course. There's the name and the link. The other file that will be useful for you to see, but not absolutely necessary, will be the video that I filmed just prior to this one, and that is Microsoft Access using XML files. In this video, I cover reading and updating an XML file. We will be using an almost exact duplicate of that code in this video, Part 6, and in fact the sample XML file I used in this video was the very same configuration file that we're going to use in this video. So here is the sequence of events that we covered in Part 5 for our approach to relinking our front end with our back end. And I wanted to show you where we're going to be working in this video, and it is this section here that is in red. So what we did in Part 5 was we built a startup form that would run automatically at application startup, and the first thing that happened was that code would test to see if it could read a predetermined table in our back end. If it can, or if it could read it, then our code would terminate. If it could not read the table, that's where we're going to modify. If it could not read the table, we read the text configuration file, and that file told us where to look for the backend database. So this is the code we're going to be modifying. We're going to be modifying the code that reads that text file. We're going to replace it with code that reads the XML file. It's still going to obtain the same data from the file that we obtained from our text file. And the only other code we're going to modify, and that's code that's not listed in the sequence of events, but it's here at the very end. After we successfully relinked the back end, I had code that updated that configuration file. So we'll be replacing that code as well. That code was updating the text file, so we'll be replacing that with code that updates our new XML file. So let's take a quick look at the XML file we're going to be using as a configuration file. Again, I've got a Notepad++ window up here showing us our XML file. I have renamed it to be called splitconfig.xml. And here we have the same configuration grouping tags that we had in the previous video. We have a location type which currently holds the word same, and we have a backend folder which holds nothing. At this moment, I have the front end and the backend database in the same folder, so this configuration file is correct for the way things are existing at this moment, and we'll modify that when we do the demo of our code. But right now, this is the place we're starting from. So I'm going to close this file, and let's take a look at our startup form. Now remember that we had this form starting up and running at application startup. Take a look at the code behind it. There we go. And again, all we did here in the form load was call check backend, and then we close that form after that code has executed. So over here in our module is check backend. And remember, the first thing we did was we checked to see if we could read a table in our backend, and that is this function. We're not going to look at this function. We're going to assume right now that it cannot read the parts table, and therefore we're going to go inside this if. But the first thing we did was we built our configuration file using string concatenation, using the current project path, and then this hard-coded name for the configuration file. And then we checked to see if the file existed, and if it did, we went through the motions of opening the file and reading a single record from it, and then we had the data in that text file delimited by a vertical pipe, so we used a split command to build an array for us so that we could get at the individual fields. So we don't need to do all that now that we have an XML file. We have an XML file that has each field defined separately. So first, we're going to build the configuration file's name using the current project path, a backslash, and then the name of the file, splitconfig.xml. Next, we're going to check to see if the configuration file does exist using the dir function. If it does exist, we'll go into this section of the if. First, we want to open the configuration file. I have built a function for this because we need to open this configuration file in two different places, so I wanted to leverage this code, not have to write it and maintain it in two different places. The first thing I want to look at before I go down to that code is to show that we have two form level objects up here at the top. Okay, we have a DOM document object, which represents the entire document, and that's going to be in an object called form DOM. Then we have an IXML DOM element. This will represent each of the nodes. We have that being loaded into object root. This is the guy that's going to give us access to each of our data elements in the file. So here we are. Here we're going to call if openxml-config is true. That means we found the file and we'll be pulling data from it. So let's take a look at this function first. Openxml-config. That is here. There we go. OpenXML-config is a function. It's going to return a Boolean value. It'll return true if it could successfully open the file. It'll return false if it could not. So we'll start off by setting our function equal to false. After that, we're going to open our XML file. First, we're going to instantiate a new instance of a DOM document in an object called form DOM. That is a form level. That is our form level object we just looked at. Then, as we explained in the previous video on writing and reading XML files, we're going to set resolve externals to false and validate on parse to false. Next, we're going to actually open the file itself. So form DOM using the load method, form DOM.load, giving it the configuration file name that we fed in here. And then we're going to check to see if we got an error on open. So we're going to test the form DOM.parseElement.reason. If it's not a zero length string, we had an error. So we will load this string using concatenation, error parsed XML file, and then pull in the form DOM.parseError.reason. And then we'll go down to this label, XML error, which is down here, displaying a message box saying we had an issue and getting out then. And having not set the value from false, we would return false to this function, and our code above could then respond appropriately. We get down into here. So when we get under here, we have an open XML file. From there, we're going to set a reference to the document elements using object root equal to our document element. So if we get to here, we have successfully opened our file and set a reference to the elements. We'll return a value of true for our function, and then return control back up to here. So if we successfully opened it, true, we'll go into this part of the if, and this is where we're going to read the values from the file. Up above, we had two variables we were filling from our text file. We're going to load those same ones. The setup type is going to hold the word same or diff. That's coming from the location type tag or element in our file. And the folder location string is going to hold the backend folder from our configuration file. Let's say we did not successfully open our configuration file. Let's say the open XML config returned a false. We'll go to this else, and we're going to run our relink driver code anyway. We're going to do it just like we did down the other else down here, and that is we're going to look for our backend database in the same folder as our front end, which is here. All right, we're not going to look at relink driver code because we've spent tons of time on that where we're going over So the rest of this whole method is the same. So the last thing I want to look at is at the very end of our code. So we're in the relink driver function, which is kind of like the traffic cop, if you will, for refreshing the table links. And down here we have called a function called refresh links. So refresh links is the function that actually goes through the motions of replacing the connection strings for our link tables with a connection string that holds the full path to our new backend database, or our backend database in its new location. After we have done all of that and it has returned a value of true, just like we did before, we set the values of same or diff based on what we found from the relinking. We set the value of the folder holding the backend up here, and we move on down, and we had code here that opened our configuration text file, opened it for output, and replaced the contents with the two fields that we just set up here, the file folder and the backend type. So we're going to replace this commented code with the XML version of this code. First, we're going to again get the name of our configuration file in the same manner we did up above, string concatenation, current project path, and then a hard-coded name for the file. We're then going to take these values and write them to our XML file. Object root.select single node, location type .text equals the value in backend type. Same thing for backend folder, equal to string file folder. And then we will use the form dom.save, giving it the name of the config file, and that's it. So let's pull over our Explorer window. Let's open our configuration file so that we have the value of same in location type, and we have a zero length string in backend folder. Let's close that guy. Notice here that I have the backend in the same folder. I'm going to cut that and put it here in test writes subfolder. Okay, so now we have front end of this folder and the back end in that folder. Let's go over here and let's start up our form. Okay, so we could not read that table that was in the back end because we moved the back end on us. Let's go over here to test writes, choose our back end, click OK. There is our success message box. Remember, this is a message box we don't want to have in a production database. This would be annoying to our users, but for us it's good to see that it ran. Click OK there. Let's go back to, here we go, back to the Explorer window and open our configuration file and take a look. Now we have the word diff in location type, and we have a path to the back end, and that's right where we put it, test writes, right? There you go. Does it matter if your configuration file is a text file or an XML file? I would think not. XML files are cooler and more in use, so maybe you want to go that route. As usual, I'll have a link to the code listing in the description of the video down below. That code listing will contain all of the code in here, not just the updated code. In addition to those links, I'll also have a link to both of the videos I mentioned at the beginning of this video that would be helpful for you to watch before watching this one. I hope you found this video useful. Hope you got something out of it. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.